My name is Bob Ward. I'm a photographer to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which means that I cover both the Secretary and the Deputy.
To call Bob Ward a veteran photographer would be an understatement.
I started here at the Pentagon in 1974 with James Schlesinger. He was replaced by the young Secretary Rumsfeld. He was the youngest secretary to serve. I think he was 43, I think, when he came into office here. It was followed by Harold Brown, Caspar Weinberger, Frank Carlucci, Dick Cheney, Les Aspin, William Perry, William Cohen. Donald Rumsfeld came back again. Robert Gates followed him, and Leon Panetta, our current secretary. I do countless award ceremonies. I just stuck these in there because it's just typical of the regular things that we do on a daily basis. Our job here is to document the activities of the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense. Virtually everything they do that might have some historic significance is things that we cover.
The toughest and easiest secretaries to photograph?
Robert Gates was a very serious man. He certainly will go down in history as being one of the finest Secretaries of Defense. He was a little difficult to photograph because he rarely gestured and he didn't smile a lot. He had a wonderful smile, but he just didn't show it very often. The easiest, on the other hand, to photograph was Donald Rumsfeld. The man was almost constantly on, it seemed like. He had wonderful expressions, he gestured constantly.
And there have been trips with the secretary. Trips upon trips upon trips.
Yeah, we've been to virtually every place except the Antarctica. Traveling with the secretary, you get to see some of his more private moments. Here he is with his family in Athens up at the Acropolis. I've visited 87 countries with the secretary, mainly with Secretaries Cheney and Perry and Cohen, and some with Rumsfeld. It always pays to keep your eyes open when you're photographing any event that the Secretary is involved in, because there are things happening peripherally that are very interesting sometimes. I remember being in Oman, out in the desert. The Secretary was meeting with the Sultan there, and I just looked out into the field, and this huge expanse of desert. There was one umbrella standing out in the desert with two men under it. I remember Secretary Cohen being at an event hosted by the Egyptian Minister of Defense, where they had native folk dancing taking place. And you just look into the eyes of some of these Egyptian women, totally covered in their scarves and face masks, and yet their eyes are so made up and they stand out, and they're really quite interesting to look at. I made a series of trips with Secretary Perry to an intercontinental ballistic missile base in Ukraine at Pervomaisk. This one base had enough missiles with their multiple independently targetable warheads to have knocked out every major city in the United States. Actually, the CIA was very interested in my pictures from that trip because they said they had only seen this base from satellite imagery. So they were looking down on everything and they had no views from ground level. So they were very interested in some of the pictures of vehicles.
Bob has photographed presidents and prime ministers, national leaders, and everyday people. He's taken more pictures than he can count, yet somehow he remembers them all. Every photograph is special to him.
Every photograph, in a way, is a last chance opportunity. If I took your picture today, this would be the last time that you would be this particular age, looking this particular way in your life. And that's one of the wonderful things about photography, is it preserves those moments for future generations to see. And I think that's important. I probably photographed several hundred retirement ceremonies in this building. I think now I should have taken notes.
Until Bob Ward retired this week, he'd been photographing activities of Secretaries of Defense since 1974, from just after the end of Vietnam to the drawdowns in Iraq and Afghanistan. But along with the official duties have come plenty of special personal moments.
I just think that it's a personal experience when you photograph something, that you connect with the subject matter, whether it be a person or a landscape. It's indelibly put into your mind and you don't forget it. You know, I was thinking about some of the photos I've taken were sort of last chance photos. You have somebody like General Omar Bradley, the last five-star general. I photographed the very last World War I vet with Secretary Rumsfeld.
Bob's gotten the chance to photograph a laundry list of non-military celebrities. News anchors like Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw and Wolf Blitzer, astronauts John Glenn and Alan Shepard, Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Bob Hope from show business.
It's always a real thrill to see the celebrities come by. It doesn't happen too often, but every once in a while, you know, you have the opportunity to see them and associate with them briefly, and it's memorable.
Celebrities came on some of his many trips, like one USO tour of Bosnia.
We had several football players like Terry Bradshaw and Mike Singletary. We had the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, which are always enjoyable to be around. When we finally did intervene in Bosnia, our troops had to come across from Hungary, and the river bridges there had been blown up by the Serbs. So we had to build the longest pontoon bridge in history. And this was the boyhood home of Winston Churchill. These were his toy soldiers. He had an immense collection. This is just a small part of it.
Bob and Secretary William Cohen planted some of Bob's old photos in a desk before Donald Rumsfeld came for a meeting to prepare for his second tour as secretary.
Secretary Cohen would take him over and said, "Well, the place hasn't changed all that much since you were here the last time." He opens up the drawer and says, "You even left some of your old photographs here." And he pulled them out, and they had a good laugh about it, thinking of how young he was at the time. He had been the youngest, and now he was going to be the oldest Secretary of Defense, so there was some difference there.
Ironically, Bob's cameras were in a secure lockup when the plane hit the Pentagon on September 11, 2001.
After the building was hit, I tried to go downstairs to get my equipment. I came to work the next day and got access to my equipment, and that was the day that President Bush came over and met with Secretary Rumsfeld and his staff, and then went outside to tour the area of devastation. So I was right there with the President and Rumsfeld on that occasion and got some good pictures.
Bob shot 11 Secretaries of Defense working under 8 different presidents. His career has spanned so many changes, he started working when the SecDef often smoked in the office. Now there's no smoking in the entire building. He saw photography go from film to digital.
Here we've got some eyes closed, so we discard that. I like this. So we'll crop that. Now I wouldn't want to go back to film. There are just so many advantages to using digital, and the quality is superb.
Whatever the format, Bob remembers the pictures.
It's interesting how even 20 years after you take a picture, you can recognize it as being your own out of a collection of other people's photos. If you're going through a magazine or something like that, you see a picture, you usually remember that that's one that you took. It's that personal.
Take the Army musicians playing at a luncheon with the Secretary.
The violinist I remember particularly well. That was memorable. The light was just beautiful on these violinists, and that's when I took the picture. Even though it probably was very routine to the performers, just the way the lighting was made it a real image for me. Most of the people I photographed, it seems like they're retiring today, and over the weekend they're going to enjoy themselves, and then they go back to work on Monday. I'm not going to do that.
Bob's retirement ceremony was filled with the expected. Gifts from colleagues, friends, and family in attendance. He says he plans to ride his bicycle, build model airplanes, take bagpipe lessons, go bird watching. The unexpected? There is one more picture he feels he has to take, the ivory-billed woodpecker.
extinct. About half the ornithological community thinks it's extinct, the other half believes it isn't, but the bird has not been photographically documented to anyone's absolute agreement on since 1943, I believe. So I believe the bird still exists, and I would like to go photograph it so prove that it has survived into the 21st century.
One last picture for the record. Reporting from the Pentagon, I'm Staff Sergeant Dion Moses.